Congresswoman from great state of North Carolina for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And this is a very important issue for North Carolina, particularly for our coast, but we've seen more inland tornadoes and other kinds of natural disasters in North Carolina. And we're no stranger to FEMA. So, Mr. Grimm, I wanted to start with you and ask you a few questions. The first question really has to do with the electricity grid, and how it responds to wind events, and wanted to know from you what you think the impact of the new infrastructure package with its funding for upgrading the electric grid and making it more resistant to wind and other weather events, what effect that would have, and whether you think that's the funding is sufficient.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, with regard to what FEMA can provide in terms of mitigation funding and increasing resilience across many lifelines, including the electrical grid in communities, very important. We work with those communities to, I mentioned the BRIC program in particular, that enables funding for lifelines for, not only for residential and non-residential construction, but also for community lifelines, things like electrical grids or power lines, those sorts of infrastructure projects. So with the recent announcement of the infrastructure bill, of course, we're very excited to have additional resources made available across the government, really to have a government-wide mission and movement to make the nation more resilient, honestly, across multiple natural hazards, whether it's windstorms, floods, earthquakes, you name it. Lifelines are impacted by many different types of natural hazards, and we need to do a better job as a nation addressing the hazards before they happen, not just after they happen. So pre-disaster mitigation is extraordinarily important, and getting ahead of that. Of course, we've shown things like building codes, for example, that we we're just talking about. For every dollar invested, $11 in return. And likewise on mitigation projects, every dollar invested, $6 in return in general, and across the different hazard areas. So anything we can do to increase our investment ahead of disasters, I think, is a huge step forward.
That's great. You anticipated my second question, which is the potential economic benefits of designing climate resilient businesses. When you talk about $1 invested, this much in return, can you be more granular about where those returns come from?
Sure. So let me expand a little bit more on the building codes. I mentioned the $1 invested is $11 in return. We also just released a codes save study that we demonstrate $132 billion of losses avoided through the adoption of modern building codes through 2040. So $132 billion, that's a huge investment to those losses avoided as we look forward, with climate change. When you look across the natural hazards, whether it's wildfire, flood, wind, or earthquake, there is always a positive return on that investment. For every dollar investment, it ranges from, I don't have the figures right in front of me, but from probably $4 to $11, depending on which, when you're looking at the granular data. We often go in post-disaster and do what are called loss avoidance studies, and we look at those investments we made pre-disaster. So let me give you an example on the wind side of things, where we went in after Hurricane Marilyn in 1995 in the USVI, and we invested hazard mitigation grant dollars. After Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we went back with our interagency partners on what is called the Mitigation Assessment team to look at those projects and how they performed. And indeed, we found that all the projects that we invested those dollars in performed extraordinarily well, and resulted in that cost savings that you're asking about.
Thank you very much. I see my time's about to expire, but at some point, maybe with one of the other questions that you get, I'd love to hear how you make investments in low income communities that might not be able to afford some of the more advanced engineering. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much. And with that, Chair is going to recognize the ranking member of the full committee,